From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
Welcome to Wise Traditions, Veda.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
I am thrilled that you're here. A friend of mine took one of your courses and she started showing me images of the crystallography that you're into, like water that was changing from liquid to ice form and how it would take on the images of the things she put it near. Like, this is just mind-blowing.
Well, it's so nice to hear you say that someone took my class and was actually also doing the work. That's one of the most exciting parts for me now that I'm teaching the technique and other people are seeing these things that otherwise may have thought that it was just unbelievable. So essentially what people are doing is, if it's a thought, for example, that they're projecting into water, they're literally seeing their thoughts crystallized in ice and imagery relative to the thought. There are so many different ways you can do this work, but you can use thoughts and words and pictures and photos of people. I've done a whole series of different people's faces where I've put the petri dish of water on top of their photograph and for 30 seconds, removed and frozen using my short-term crystallographic technique, and seen these incredible images relative to that person's features appear in the ice. So I have over 36,000 photos of water responding in this incredibly artistic, intelligent manner. So it is far from random.
I would say so. And I'm familiar with the work of Dr. Emoto, who demonstrated that how we speak or the energy that we put toward water changes its structure. He studied it under a microscope, and people can look that up. How is your work similar to or different from Dr. Emoto's work?
Sure. Well, essentially, my work is macroscopic. He was working with a microscope. So there is a large difference in the fact that he was looking at very small, really small features that you are not so easy to see with the naked eye, whereas I actually use my iPhone to take all my photos. And
You do?
I do, and I don't even have a macro setting. I just use my regular settings on my iPhone. So therefore, they're actually macroscopically huge. One of the reasons I call my technique CMP, standing for collective molecular photography, is that I think that the water molecules are working as a kind of collective to create imagery that we can recognize, much like pixels do for a photo. So Emoto's work was also very much, he would use the term experiment a lot, whereas I don't use the term experiment at all, because I'm a body of water, and because I see incredible responses in water, I give water the same kind of respect that I don't want to experiment on water. For me, it's a relationship. And so any healthy relationship doesn't usually involve experimentation. You have an open heart and you accept people for exactly the way they are, and you're curious and interested in what they have to share in the world and how you can support that. So my relationship with water is very much a kind of intimate one, where I am very curious about water, but I'm not in the mindset of experimentation, because I feel like water has become like a reflection of myself. And so much of what I see now is that water is showing me what's inside of my heart, what's inside of my thoughts, what's around me, around my family. And so it's become a very, it's like an intimate conversation with a friend or something or someone that you love, rather than the mindset of, let's see how we can, let's experiment. It's a different
Right.
mindset. Yeah.
It's like you don't want this to be a party trick. You want to have a relationship with water. I'm curious what made you initially curious about what water was capable of.
hmm Well, there's two parts to that, really. Very early on, I was in a horrendous car accident, and we went under a 7-ton truck, rolled twice. The driver he died immediately. And over the course of 20 years, I had 8 surgeries, mostly for bowel surgery because the seatbelt had wrapped around my waist and crushed my internal organs, which left scar tissue on my small bowel. Anyway, so I went in for small bowel surgery, and because of all the anesthetic I'd had over the course of time, I ended up with blood clots in my lungs. When I woke up, they said, you have showers of clots in your lungs, and I'd gone in for bowel surgery, and I'm like, what? And so the doctors wanted me to take warfarin, which is a blood thinner. And so I did that for a period of time until I had an X-ray and it was all clear. And they were encouraging me to continue to take this blood thinner. And I believe everyone has a choice as to what they do with their body. But I chose that I wanted to keep my body healthy and that my body could heal and stay well naturally. And so I started looking around, what can I do? And I ended up speaking to a friend of mine who was a medical doctor. He also practiced Ayurvedic medicine. And he said, look, totally off the record, if you can find a naturally, emphasis on natural, not ionized or altered or changed, he said, if you can find a natural high source of alkaline water, that might be able to help stabilize your body, essentially, without getting on all the details. And so I became the guinea pig of my own health, and I started trying all these different types of more alkaline waters. And it's quite easy to get alkaline water in New Zealand. Even our rainwater is slightly alkaline generally. So, so I ended up, I had a wellness center, and a client came and she said, there's this man, this old guy, he's got his own private water source. pH out of the ground is 9.9, which was one of the highest I'd ever heard of, naturally. And he's only giving it to cancer patients. So I went and I saw him, and I explained my situation. He gave a month's worth of water to try. Within 3 days, I noticed a big change in an area a lot of people don't want to talk about, but probably should talk about, which is bowel motions. And there are so many people dehydrated, sitting on the toilet trying to push a pebble out for an hour, and maybe drink some water. That might help. And so after having so much bowel surgery, that was something I noticed. And then within day 10 and 12, I had all these bumps coming up along my arm and jaw that were really painful. And I'm like, I knew my body was purging, but I didn't actually know what was coming out. So there was one that was like super angry. And so I ended up like getting some tweezers and digging in there and seeing what was going on. As gross as that sounds, but I actually pulled out a little bit of green glass. And then over the course of that day 10 and 12, I pulled out 27 bits of green glass from my arm and my jaw.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I'm like, how is this possible? The only thing I had done different was drink this water. And so that was when I really started to investigate, what makes this water different? How is this a healing water? What properties are there that make it unique? How can it purge water from my body? And you can look at an analysis of water and read all of the things that water holds, but that's not telling you about the water itself. It's kind of like when you look up at the sky, you can see tons of clouds, but that's not the sky. So it was a very interesting kind of way of starting to investigate water, because it had high pH, it had high bicarb, all of these practical things, but it felt like there was something so much more that was going on. And when you read what Tesla says, if you want to know the secrets to the universe, look at energy, frequency, vibration. So I started to think about what could have possibly purged this glass out of my arm. And I thought, well, I've always said that each individual person has their own kind of song, and that song changes with a change of perspective. And so what it felt like was that all of the trillions of cells in my body were part of this orchestra. And all of a sudden, when drinking this water, it was as if there was a new player that came to play in my orchestra. And she was like the opera singer right at the end that breaks the glass with that high pitched, high frequency sound, and it was as if that's what actually pushed the glass to the surface of my skin all at once, and there this water had a certain energy about it, of which I think certain waters around the world do. I think there are medicine waters around the world.
Mm-hmm.
I no longer have access to that water. I always get flooded with people asking for it when I talk about it, but that man um, sold the property. He was very old, and now I don't have access to that water. But I did a bunch of studies with it when I did have it, access to it, with clients from the wellness center, and I saw dramatic um, healing happen from people who are very sick, and even for the very, very healthy and the athletes who are looking for those incremental little changes that just give them that extra bit of energy. And they said that they felt that, and everybody's eyesight improved. So for healing, there was something incredibly powerful about that experience for me and for many others that led me on to the inquiry more around the new science of water, where Dr. Gerald Pollack talks about the fourth phase of water, which is the stage between liquid and ice, and that is actually the stage where my freezing process happens. Um, and then I was looking at Emoto's work, and he unfortunately was slammed by the scientific community
Mm-hmm.
because he admitted to choosing the best pictures to display.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with that, because he was displaying something significant, and what he did do was open the doorway for people to see themselves as sensitive bodies of water, sensitive to thoughts and environment and all these various kinds of things. Because not by volume, but by molecular count, we're 99% water, which means
Yes.
that we have more water molecules in our bodies than stars in the Milky Way. And if you've ever gone to an observatory or a star dome where you can look up and actually see just what that looks like, how many stars are in the Milky Way, it's mind blowing.
Yes.
So,
So let's repeat that statistic that there is more water in our bodies than stars in the
in the
Milky
Milky
Way.
Way.
That is mind blowing. And so, if Emoto is right, and if you're right in that the energy we put out can impact the water, then we need to be very clear and intentional about the energy that we put toward ourselves, right?
Ultimately, I think that water is always in search of itself. By
Mm,
that, we see the entire world through the lens of water because our eye lens is 99% water. There is that saying that eyes are the windows to the soul, and if that's true, then tears are an expression of spirit. People get very afraid sometimes talking around that particular topic. We have to be mindful of our thoughts. We have to be careful. It's actually like the terminology and the
mm,
way we talk about it. It adds more fear to the fear that's already out there. I have been witness to water being incredibly sensitive to all kinds of things.
mm,
But what overrides the different thoughts that come in is the groundwork of the foundational work of intention. If you wake up in the morning and you set an intention, that is the overriding arcing energy that you have put forward for that day. Whatever little thoughts come in, because I have children that have learnt about Emoto's work, that have learnt and heard about the sensitivity of water, and have become afraid that if they have a bad thought, it's going to ruin everything in their body. And people,
oh,
because I work with children so much, it's so easy for them to become stuck on something that's actually not true. So what I teach and what I've seen in my work more than anything is is that the foundation, the intention is far far greater than the thought
mm,
that come in and out. Because I feel like if you just wake up and set an intention, something achievable, like today I'm going to be kind to myself. Today I am going to live with gratitude for what I do have, not what I don't have. Um, and yet such a big part of being in the world is worrying about what other people think. about, am I doing this right? Am I beautiful enough? Am I this enough? Am I rich enough? Am I all the enough stuff? Water is always telling us that we are more than enough, and that in fact we already are source. I always say water is going, always from the mountains going towards the sea. It's always going back to source. But like I said, we are these liquid crystal systems. We are an ocean. We're not fresh water. The crystal part's very, very important. It's one of the reasons we can actually store and hold our memories. What we are doing, like if you think about the crystals that are in our technology, they're there to store information.
Mm-hmm.
Salt is a crystal. And when you put salt in water, it not only adds an electrical element, it adds the foundation of information and storage holding. So I think of water in a couple of ways. One of them is that I think of water in the more spiritual aspect as the observer, not as the judger. Water never judges. It is observing only. When it comes into the physical body, or when it's become like streams and things like that, it picks up all of these minerals and salts. Therefore, it starts to store and hold memory, which is why I think of distilled water more as an observer, whereas spring water more as it's more in action. It's more creating memories. And so we as humans are creating memories in every moment. If we look back at our entire life, it is a memory. When we are looking towards our future, it is in our imagination. Right now is what we have, and we are a body of water, of which is storing and holding incredible memories from the moment that we're conceived and even further, because water is never dies, and we are made up of so much of it. It's just always in one of its stages, and the secrets are in the subtleties. There are like over 300 different types of ice, and that's just one stage of water. And within those various different types of ice are subtleties and layers. And because there's water in the air, and that's a huge part of the way we have energy and way we feel energy, So we have this liquid water within us that has all this information about us. And when we drink water, that water comes into this incredible, intelligent, sophisticated water system.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we think about the fact that we breathe, that means that there is evaporated water in the air, and specifically around us. And so we
Mm-hmm.
also have electrical charge, and the water in the air is attracted to our electrical charge, sharing information from the outside world into the inside world of our body, and also sharing information about us. So when we come into contact with somebody without touching them, and our conscious awareness becomes aware of one another, we can feel what that person feels like to us. Sometimes it's an instant, oh, you look so familiar. How do I know you? Or sometimes it's like love at first sight. Or sometimes it's like, oh, no, there's a weird energy. I'm not sure about you. Or you can go into a house which has had something weird go on in it, and you just feel this vibe. It's like, but we don't know how. Well, this water in the air explains so much of that, and we have this web of energy all the way around us, always feeling more of these subtle atmospheric kind of informational layers. And when you actually meet someone and you have that immediate connection, so often it's because the patterns of that web that you have match or are very similar to the patterns that they have.
Oh my gosh, this is fascinating and mind blowing at the same time as I process the idea that water is all around us in the very air, as you said, in our present in our exchanges with one another, in our bodies where there's also electrical charge, and it's an observer and not a judge. Like I'm just trying to summarize all the bits and pieces, but I want to go back a little bit, Vita, just to the crystallography. Let's take it back a little bit just to the kind of secret intelligence of water and how it does carry information. And I know some of the people listening right now will simply be listening on audio, but some may be watching us on video. Can you share an impression or two of the crystallography and what was conveyed to the water or from the water?
Absolutely. And honestly, I think that's the most important part sometimes, because I can rave on for hours about these amazing images, but until you see them, you don't know why I'm so excited. So let me pull some pictures up here. So this is examples here of Emoto's work, just for people that haven't seen it. Another person who inspired me, his name was Laurent, or is Laurent Costa. Now, he was taking microscopic photos of water, but he thought of water as a spiritual teacher as well. So he felt like he just wanted to invite water to share whatever it wanted. And sometimes he'd smile at the water before he froze it and microscopically took photos. And you can see he's getting these happy faces and various things like that. So I'm going to skip through some of these. My first ever work with water involved me just being curious to see, did water actually store information? How is this possible? I mean, don't believe everything you read, because you want to be able to see for yourself. So I held a petri dish of water in my hand like this, and I was thinking about what I was going to think about. I thought I'd project a thought, but then I saw a bit of fluff floating around in the dish. So I put my hand in to take the fluff out, consciously thinking, I wonder if my hand will have any impact on the water's quote unquote memory. Then I put it into my freezer with the peas and the broccoli and everything. And and then I let it freeze. And this was when, in the beginning, I totally froze the water. I haven't done that in many, many years now because I discovered something really important. But what we see here is the photo that I took after I pulled it out of the freezer. And you can see that it is definitely a hand, and it took up half the petri dish. So that's actually really huge. And it's undeniable a hand.
Yes.
And it looks very much like an X-ray of a hand.
Yeah, it does.
Yes, I inherited my mother's two slightly bent fingers on either side of my middle finger, and you can see that even in this hand, those two fingers are slightly bent. So it wasn't just any hand, it was my hand. And I was kind of freaked out, honestly, when I saw this, because I wasn't expecting to see this. And then I went to the ocean and I thought, well, if any water is going to be informed, it'll be seawater. And I froze it, and you can see there's fish, the tail, the eye, the fins, the gill. And it's a different texture because seawater freezes differently than fresh water. Mm-hmm. And then as my technique improved, you can see the difference between this hand image that I showed earlier and now this image, which was from the thought of an arrow, of which actually my son Rama, who was only about probably like 11 at the time when he did this, his name Rama, it's a Hindu name, and Lord Rama was said to always have a bow and arrow. So we were talking about bow and arrows, and Rama projected the thought of an arrow into the water. This is using his thought only. And then he froze the water using my technique, which is actually only 5 minutes, and I'll talk about in a second.
Okay.
And you can see how clear the arrowhead is. And he took this photo himself. So you see what amazing lighting it is and what children can do. It's remarkable. Mm-hmm. So as far as my technique goes, I get the water when it's in two parts. I started to become curious because as I discovered more about the fourth phase of water, that stage between molecular chaos and molecular order, water as it's in its liquid stage is updating its information every trillionth of a second, whereas ice, completely solid, is in a more stable condition. Whereas the stage as it's beginning to freeze and beginning to melt is actually a very interesting stage. And for me, I wanted to see what I was missing after a year's worth of totally freezing water, seeing pretty cool, amazing imagery. But I look back at that now and I'm amazed I got the imagery I did get. So as I opened my freezer earlier and earlier at around 5 minutes, and each freezer setting is different, I saw there was liquid on top and there was some ice below it. And I was curious about what was going on underneath. So I pulled it out, the water tipped away, and there was the most incredible imagery on the dish. And I began to realize that water freezes in layers, and what we're capturing in that, in the crystallography that appears under the water is the first freeze. And that first freeze is the water that's basically taken on the most information based on what the influence was prior to freezing. And water can also show you its signature patterns. So each type of water has a signature pattern. This looks like a pretty boring picture, but it's very, very important in the sense that you can see there is light around the ice that's forming. A woman, an Indigenous woman, she said to me once that she could speak to bees, and she would watch bees like going around doing their thing and around the hive for ages. And one bee apparently communicated to her, "We don't mind you watching the hive, but please don't look at us for too long because your conscious expression is putting too much light in our hive and we like it to be darker."
Ah,
And so, if your conscious expression is putting more light into water, and water designs with light, so what we're seeing in this picture is that actually it's the light that is emanating out of the water as it's beginning to freeze that is doing the designing, and water is following it. It's a very, very interesting phenomena. And one of the qualities of fourth phase water, which is more of a gel or a plasma, is that it can absorb more light. So some examples here, I used my friend's face, her photo, as an inspiring influence, where I put the petri dish of water on top of her face for 30 seconds, removed and froze. You can see it's created her face. Here is Sadhguru's face, and you can see it's created his. Here is a Roman coin, and that person's face is depicted. You can see the water slightly over frozen here, but you can still see that the face has appeared. And then these are just some more examples of my work. I mean, literally there are thousands. This one's
yes.
interesting, where I put my thumb into the water, remove it, and you can clearly see my thumb. But what was interesting is you can see the chip at the end of the nail in the picture in the ice. A few hours after doing that, I actually chipped my nail in exactly the same place.
No.
Yes. And
That
so
is
this,
fascinating.
I'm starting to see more and more of things like that happen. This one where you can see a little baby, a pregnant lady sipped some water. I asked her to take a sip of water, think about her baby. It was in the earlier stages of pregnancy. And I froze that leftover water, and you can see her little baby in the ice. The one underneath it it's of a dog. It looks like a etching almost. It's really this is art as well. I always say that art is the heart of water. And I was at a cafe, and there was this Schnauzer dog which had come to drink from the bowl the cafe leave out for thirsty dogs. And for whatever reason, in my mind, I was thinking, "Oh wow, I wonder what the water would show, if I took some of that dog bowl water." So I asked the waitress if I could get a takeaway cup to get some of the dog bowl water. I'm sure it was one of the craziest things she's ever been asked. But she gratefully she let me have some, and I just went home and simply froze it using my technique. And you can see it's designed the actual dog. Just more examples. My son and children get very involved in my work, and I'm actually working on a project right now with the Auckland Art Gallery, where we're hoping to put a kind of a project together where children can come in and actually do this work, learn how to do the crystallography, and it actually be part of a whole kind of working installation art piece, which is showing something really extraordinary, mixing science, art, and consciousness together. So
Vita, well, of course, I have so many questions, but I want to ask you, you've hinted at this, but help us know how what you've learned about the secret intelligence of water, how has it affected your physical and spiritual health? And how might it affect ours?
um, water won't work or do this kind of work if you are in a state of expectation, control, or frustration or anger. It's not judging, it simply doesn't resonate in those frequencies. I have had to be confronted multiple times when I have assumed that I knew what water was going to do. I think one of the most beautiful things that I've been reminded is that water is wild. And if you want to make friends for the wild animal, for example, you take things very slow. You come in, you show respect, you observe, you don't try and control them or lasso them or any of these things. The moment water senses any kind of ego part in me, it just won't do this. So I always encourage people when teaching this work, just stay in your curiosity. Don't have an expectation, because the moment you do, water will show you something you don't expect. And so it has been a very humbling experience. But at the same time, I have seen some of the most beautiful, eye-opening patterns in water, especially in relation to questions that I've asked. Like my mum passed away in 1999, and she was the most incredible woman to me in the world, just such a beautiful angel. And years prior, I'd lived in Japan. And so it was before the days of cell phones and like emails and stuff. So we would actually physically write to each other. And at the end of every letter, my mother would attempt to draw a circle, because her circles were really bad. And then she'd put a heart in the middle. But nobody else knew that she did that. I have this pile of her letters where I have this little misshapen circles with hearts in the middle. So a few years ago, I said, because there's nothing stopping me, I asked the water straight up verbally. I said, could you connect to my mum? And the image in the ice was a misshapen circle with a heart in the middle. And I do that now every year on her birthday, and the pictures are getting more and more incredibly beautiful. So for me, it has made me truly believe. I've always been interested in different belief systems, philosophies, but in fact, more than ever, water has literally shown me, without a shadow of a doubt in my heart or my perspective, that it is the connecting force of all life. I've studied something called hydroglyphs for the last 4 years, which are essentially an ice symbol that I've discovered that reoccurs in ice using the same word. So to say I have one hydroglyph, I write a word down, I put my dish of water on top of it for 30 seconds, use my whole technique, and I'll see the same symbol appear. And I have to have done that at least 50 times to say it's not random. I have 35 glyphs. And the glyph for living is this, what I call a fern hexagon. It looks like a star in the shape of a hexagon if you kind of put and then each leg of the star has these ferns. And so that means living and gratitude. Those are its two most prominent meanings, because these ice symbols have layers of meaning, and I have other people around the world helping me discover them. One man asked me, could you please ask what death looks like, because I've been only given a few months to live. After having already discovered what living meant, I thought, well, I wonder what death will mean. So I wrote the word death. I used this technique, but I kept seeing the living glyph over and over and over and over and over again. I kept seeing the living glyph, and then it finally dawned on me. Of course, we as people, we use labels all the time. We've slapped the label of dead water on polluted water or denatured or destructured water, but water doesn't die. Water evaporates. And so water is always in one of its stages. It's one of the things we actually see, which is a kind of immortality. And so, it's very interesting, because for water, it's suggesting and saying, not only is it the connecting force of all life, it could well be the bloodline of all life. It could be the very reason that we can, in fact, observe ourselves, where I have interviewed many people who have had near-death experiences, had the sense of rising, which is what gas does. It expands as it rises. And then they look down upon their body. 3 people said the same thing. They pretty much said, I hope that person's going to be okay. They no longer had any attachment to their physical body, but they had become the observer. So my father is Maori, which is the native New Zealand people. The word for spirit in Maori is wairua, which means 2 waters, the physical waters and the spiritual waters. And so there is something very, very real here, that the ancient, the indigenous people, and many wise people have probably known for a long time. In New Zealand, we're the first country in the world where a river was given the rights of personhood, the Whanganui River, where the tribe fought so hard with the Crown because they saw the gravel being taken from the belly of the river, and they hated that. They They saw that the belly was being scraped. They saw that the effluence was coming into the mouth of the river, which was abominable to them. And then they saw even worse, since the head is considered the most sacred part of the body in Maoridom, the headwaters were being diverted, which was considered aquatic decapitation.
Oh.
They considered themselves one with the water, and that water is not a resource, it is in fact to them an ancestor. And so they actually were able to work for years to be given finally this river the rights of personhood. So it is not out of the ordinary for certain rivers to be considered not only sacred but family.
Mm. And I'm thinking of how water is a part of our birth as well. The waters have to break for us to come into this world. And I understand that when a person passes, their body releases all the fluids, right? That people urinate and defecate and all water, everything starts coming out. The fluid starts
Mm-hmm.
coming out. So fascinating. But what do you say to the person, Veda, who's like, oh, I just don't, this is too woo woo for me. I don't think water is source or has any secret intelligence at all. This woman's off a rocker. Do you engage with them, or do you simply observe like water does?
Well, I mean, anyone's invited to learn it for themselves. I mean, that's the thing. I actually don't feel the need anymore to. I don't know that I've ever really felt the need to justify any of it, because it is so prolific. The evidence is there for 36,000 photos is not to be denied, and a lot of repeatability for a lot of the work. And now that I'm teaching it, and a lot of people around the world are actually seeing really interesting results, which I'm sharing a lot more of now. Actually, I think that whoever resonates with this is the people that need to learn this. Whoever doesn't
Hmm.
believe it, there's always going to be those people.
Yes.
Even Jerry Pollack, who talks about the fourth phase of water, has scientists saying he's a pseudoscientist, and he is one of the most legit scientists out there. This is the way the world is now. And it probably has been always, there's someone going to say it's bollocks. Well, that's fine.
It's true.
It actually doesn't matter. It's actually, if you don't like the science aspect, look at this as art. I always
Mm.
encourage people, art is the place to see this work, regardless of how the art became. What we're seeing is water designing into imagery that is recognizable. And that's remarkable. When you see art, you're not criticizing it so much as you're going, what does this mean to me? With art, you're not throwing it all away as meaningless. You're looking at it and it has meaning for you. So I worked professionally as an artist, as an oil painter for many years, and I see the world
Mm.
as from an artistic perspective, and I see this as the safe place really for this work, because that that is also part of the way in which water is communicating. Because art, like there's that saying, a picture speaks 1,000 words, and I found that water is the liquid language of water can be seen through this space of ice. It's where the unseen becomes seen. And there are many scientists now working and talking much more about water's ability to store information. So, for anyone that's actually really interested in the science, I recommend you go and look at Dr. Gerald Pollack's TED talk or his book, The Fourth Phase of Water, and really
Yes.
research that. And there's many other scientists involved. Whereas for me personally, I'm a researcher. I'm not making because I don't understand how all of this is working, but I'm presenting the evidence that it is. I actually invite scientists and invite people to help me understand more, to help
Hmm.
me understand how this is happening, because every day I'm amazed. It's not like I'm not amazed anymore. I'm still amazed every day.
Oh, it's so fascinating. And just to let the listener know, we have had Dr. Gerald Pollack on our show, on the Wise Traditions podcast, talking about the fourth phase of water. And it was in the early days of the show, and it just all went over my head. But the more I've been around folks like you and experts about health and wellness, the more water is coming up. So I'm so grateful. So I just have a couple more questions before we wrap up. One is, Vita, do you find those healing waters we spoke of earlier in this program, wherever you go? I guess I'm bringing it up because I was in Ecuador last summer, and often when I would go to a waterfall, they would tell me this water is very healing. but there were many areas of water that was very healing. Do you make an effort to go to waterfalls, to creeks, to rivers, to place where water is flowing? Do you find those especially healing as well?
Well, I think we need to find all of those things within our own body. One of the things I say to the children when I go into schools is, if your skin was invisible and your organs were see-through, what would you look like? Every single one of them comes back to streams, tributaries, waterfalls, and rain.
Mm.
We have at this all of these water systems inside of us, plus we're an ocean. So in fact, we're always looking outside of ourselves for healing. All healing happens within the body. And so I love going to waterfalls, because there is some places in Japan, I believe, that actually where people go and stand by the waterfall, and I think in Switzerland, because the spray from the waterfall is said to be very good for asthmatics, very good
Hmm.
for people that are having various issues. Plus, there's a certain amount of negative ions in the air when you're going along the beach, for example. That's why walking along the beach makes you feel good, especially if you have bare feet, because negative charge is coming up through your feet from the earth. And so these kinds of things, we're always so much as people attracted to the water. But even if you can't go to those places, and some people they can't. It's like if you're lucky enough to have a shower, I often will like write something or draw a heart or something in the steam in the shower, and it feels like it's my way of like communicating through my own picture imagery. If you lie back
Mm.
in a bath, one of the first things you notice, if you immerse your head back in the bath and you're including your ears, your heartbeat will start pumping in your ears. You'll hear the sound, and you'll start hearing the swishing noise of that heartbeat. That's the movement of the fluids and water within you. It's reminding us of this kind of primordial aspect of our entire being. We look at
Hmm.
ourselves with our fourth phase water eyes, but we don't consider ourselves to be bodies of water, because even though when we cut ourselves we leak, when we have an emotional expression of tears we leak, when we sweat we're leaking, and various other things that we leak, even down to the conception of an embryo of a child. Not just being born, but the way in which we're conceived is all through
Mm.
fluids, not just
Mhm.
humans, but
Mhm.
we're talking about eggs as well, and different, like, various different aspects of birth and conception. Water is a part of all of these things. So it is very interesting when you start going, yes, I mean, I love going to water sources. I love being able to know that my conscious expression, me looking in a rain puddle and I see my reflection, is just as likely that the water is seeing my reflection in itself. And it's having a response as much as I'm having a response. I know that might sound woo-woo to some people, but hey, it is all perspective, isn't it? This entire
Yes.
this entire world is based on many people's different versions of truth. And
Mm.
so water is one of the most incredible truths we all know, all nature knows. We simply cannot live without it. And there's like a reel going around on Instagram where this guy is saying something like, this woman asks a question, what if water was God? And then
I've
this
seen
man
that one.
answers,
Yes, I
right?
love it.
And
Yes.
it's like, well, that would mean would it be inside of us and outside of us, above us and below us? That would mean that there could be no life without it. It could give life and take it away. There are so many aspects to that, which is just, I'm not saying it's true, but I'm just saying it's interesting,
Oh,
where
it's
you
fascinating.
see things from a slightly different perspective.
Yes. Well, thank you for your perspective today. I feel like it is a beautiful reflection of all the work you've done, and both spiritually and physically. I want to conclude now with a question I often pose at the end of the show. If the listener could just do one thing to improve their health, because we like to focus on these things in the Wise Traditions world, what would you recommend that they do, Vita?
Hmm. Um, I'm just going to share something that has been one of the most mind blowing things I've discovered. Um, this stage of the crystallography that I'm talking about, is called liquid crystal. It's an incredibly powerful stage. My children taught me something amazing. Years ago, my daughter Shanti, as I was doing the crystallography, and after I'd taken a photo, but before the ice had melted, she'd say, "Mummy, can I have that?" So I'm like, "Okay." So I gave it to her, and she started to eat the ice. I'm like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, Mummy, it's good for me." I'm like, oh, "Okay." And then my son, a while later, came like a week or so later. He said, "Oh, can I have that?" And he started to do it. And I said, "Oh, did your sister Shanti show you that?" And he goes, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like, "Oh, no, never mind." And so over the course of time, the children would individually come and want to eat the ice. And then when I started to teach this technique, other mothers and fathers would say, "Oh, you know what? My children have started asking me that too." And I started to, because I watch patterns. So I'm like, what do they know that I don't? And so my partner, he did a whole study using my technique, using words of plant medicines. He would write the word ayahuasca. He would write the derivatives, like the psychoactive derivatives. So he would write DMT. He would write words like ibogaine and various things like that. And what was interesting was that um, for the week that he was writing the word for ayahuasca, uh, he would eat the ice afterwards. And after that week, he actually said, to me privately, he said, I might need to take this seriously, because he was starting to get some awakenings happen. And so I have recently started to share this with other people and on my workshops. And so I'm finally starting to hear back from some people that have had health issues. One of them, I've had several people that have had insomnia, and one lady's got back to me and she did it 3 times a day. She chose the word to write down. So what the most powerful part is to write the word, put the dish on top of the word for 30 seconds. I only give that as an indicator, but 30 seconds seems to be a good time. Use my technique and then pull it out and then observe it and then eat it. And so she did that 3 times a day, and she said that after day 10, she had the best sleep she'd had in 3 years. So
Oh,
it's very, very early days, but it's
yes.
a very, very significant, because water doesn't read words, it reads the energy of words. What I think, in a similar way to homeopathy, that we are kind of seeing the spirit of the plant in the ice, because I've done studies using homeopathy. In this particular situation, we're seeing the kind of spirit of the word personified. So it's different when you have liquid water and you pray on it and you do a nice thing and you drink it. It's still lovely, but the imprint is is very, very much solidified. It's the inform part. When something is informed, it's in form. So it's become in form in this liquid crystal stage. And because we're only photographing, or only eating, for example, the first freeze, the first layer, that is the most potent layer of that information. People do need to learn to know how to do my technique to do this, but once you've got it, and it's not hard, and it's not expensive, all you really need to do is get a glass petri dish, and the rest is easy. It is, and you do need a freezer, but no special freezer. Um, and you do need to know the stages to look for. But I help everyone through this, and in the workshops, and you can just get the PDF, the step-by-step guide. But once you know how to do that, you can do that in multiple ways. Plus, you can also do it with your urine. There are a lot of people that are doing this kind of urine therapy, kind of a shimbabu thing, and
Yes.
they've started to do that with the crystallographic urine. So there's a lot there. So hopefully that will give you some. That's the most helpful I can give, because I've seen it to be more powerful than the blessing of the liquid water.
Wow. Well, this has been a powerful conversation, Vita. I'm so thankful you were on our show. Really, really appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure.